Chapter 23, Rickenback Falls. Molly was the first to act, of course. It was a predictable move, not just because of her speed, but because of her anger. Daniel knew that she would be itching for a rematch, and that first blood would belong to her. The Supers had insisted that the Shroud fight them in the open. That much, at least, was good planning. They had no desire to face Plunkett in the shadows and confined quarters of the cave, and Plunkett seemed willing to oblige. He flew out of the tunnel like a shot, his eerie laughter echoing off the quarry walls. But, thanks to Rowan, the Supers were ready. No sooner had Rowan shouted his warning than Molly pressed her attack. She aimed for his legs, and at the speed she was moving, it must have felt as if he'd been hit by a car. Knocked off balance, the Shroud tumbled down the hill to the bottom of the ravine, where Clay was waiting for him. Clay's first punch sent the Shroud soaring through the air, slamming him against the quarry's stone face. As the shadowy villain slumped to the ground, Bud started laughing, polluting the air with his sour stench. "Look at that, Clay," giggled Bud. "You clocked him with one punch." Clay spat into his hand and wiped it on his dirty jeans. There was a dark sheen of something stuck to his knuckles. "Yeah, but it was like hitting an oil slick. Thought you guys said this guy was going to be tough." Clay turned his back on Plunkett and glared up at the rest of the group. "You losers were scared of that?" "Don't turn your back on him! Stick to the plan!" shouted Rowan, but it was too late. There was a hissing noise, a rustle of movement, and from the Shroud's crumpled body, a long tendril of darkness spun toward Clay, lassoing his neck like a noose. "Strong child," whispered Plunkett. "Now it's my turn." The tendril twisted as the Shroud floated up into the air, and Clay's face turned blue with the effort to breathe. Bud was no longer laughing. "Time for Plan B," shouted Molly. "What's Plan B?" asked Rowan. "Hit him! Hard!" She flew at Plunkett again, but this time he was ready. She struck a wall of blackness that tangled around her arms and legs. She might just as well have flown into a tar pit. Bud was next, his cloud of noxious gas engulfing the Shroud, but to no effect. Whatever the Shroud stuff was made of, it protected him from Bud's attack. From the entrance of the cave, Daniel watched as the Shroud took down the Super's two offensive fighters. Without Clay or Molly, the battle was over. The rest of the group just didn't know it yet. As Daniel watched, Louisa appeared next to Molly, phasing right through a boulder to reach her. She was trying to free Molly from the tar-like blackness, but she seemed to be making matters worse, as the clinging stuff spread over Molly's body, almost as if it had a mind of its own. Bud and Rowan were desperately tugging at the noose around Clay's neck, but to no avail. Clay was strong and nearly indestructible, but he was gasping for breath that wasn't there. Even he couldn't last much longer. And through it all, Daniel did nothing. He turned his back on the battle and walked back into the cave to sit by Eric's side. Already, the color was returning to his friend's face. His breathing was getting stronger. He'd live. But by the time he woke up, it would be too late. The Shroud would have already won. "All of this," Daniel said softly. "He's doing all of this because of me. Because he thinks I'm like him. I'm so sorry, Eric. They're going to lose, and there's nothing I can do to help. I'm not like you. I'm no leader. All my plans led us here. Right into his hands. Now he's going to win, and I'm powerless to stop it." Daniel opened his fist, exposing the coal black ring, cupped in his palm. Unless what?" asked a small voice behind him. Daniel turned and looked for the speaker, but no one was there. "Rose?" he asked. "Is that you?" "I'm not supposed to say," answered a voice from nowhere. "Louisa told me to stay disappeared, and to be quiet until it was all over." "Run home, Rose. You should run home as fast as you can." "But Louisa said—" "It's too late, Rose. We lost." "Aren't you going to help them? What's in your hand? Is it something to help them?" asked Rose, suddenly visible by Daniel's side. She was reaching for the ring in Daniel's palm. "No!" he said, pulling his hand away from her. "You can't touch it. It'll hurt you if you do. I'm sorry. I just don't know what to do." But even as Daniel said it, he knew that wasn't exactly true. He had the ring. "Please!" shouted Rose, tears filling her eyes. "You're the smart one. Louisa always says. So help them." Daniel gripped the ring so tightly in his fist that he could feel it cutting into his flesh. The ring was an incredible source of power, but power at what cost? He might be able to use it against Plunkett, but first he'd have to use it against his friends. Incredible source of power. Then the answer hit him like a bolt from the sky. He felt that familiar rush, the excitement that he got when the final piece of a puzzle came together. "Stay here, Rose, and look after Eric. You're right. I am the smart one, and I just figured out how to beat him." Shoving the ring into his jeans pocket, he ran along the tunnel out into the open and toward the battle. He felt smart, he felt brave, and he felt ready for a fight. Plunkett had made a mistake, one so obvious that Daniel had almost missed it. The old villain had lived in a world of comic book villains for too long. "I know how to beat you," he cheered as he bounded down the steep incline, careless of how much he stumbled or fell. The shroud looked up, and Daniel could feel the old man's angry glare from within the cowl of shadow. "Don't be foolish, Daniel. This is your moment as much as it is mine." The ooze stopped its spread over Molly. Rowan and Bud seemed to be making headway in freeing Clay. Apparently, Plunkett's traps needed his full concentration to work, and if nothing else, Daniel had just bought his friends a little more time. "You're going too far. You're out of control," said Daniel. "Sometimes sacrifices have to be made," said Plunkett. "But you can save their lives, Daniel, by taking their power for your own and ridding them of their memories of all of this. Leave them powerless, or watch as they suffer the ultimate fate." Plunkett wasn't bluffing. Daniel could tell. The years of secrecy and loneliness had finally driven the old man insane. For all these years, Plunkett had deluded himself into believing that he was acting for the good of the world, while somewhere in the twisted recesses of his mind was the knowledge that he really was just a villain. The truth was there in his art, in those comics he had drawn so many years ago, in which he reduced himself to a lurking shadow, preying upon the sleeping, the defenseless. He wanted Daniel to help him continue the lie. He needed an ally to keep him from facing the truth. He wanted Daniel to help him continue that lie. He needed an ally to keep him from facing the truth, and he was willing to kill to get one. "You said it yourself, Plunkett," said Daniel, taking another step toward him. He needed to keep Plunkett talking, to keep him distracted until he could get close enough for what he had planned. "You told me that Graham was full of light. She might have changed the world, but you stole that from her. I won't steal the same gift from my friends. I'm not like you, and I never will be." Though Daniel couldn't see the expression on Plunkett's face, he still felt the old man's fury. His rage was like a living thing, palpable in the very air around him. "If you want to honor your grandmother's memory so," he hissed, "then you can join her." Daniel ran headlong at the shroud, but only made it a few feet. From within the blackness of the shroud's being came another tendril of dark blackness, whipping around Daniel's neck with an iron grip. But unlike Clay, Daniel wasn't invulnerable. He had no super strength to protect him. With just a flick, Plunkett would snap Daniel's neck. "Goodbye, Daniel. Such a waste. The world's greatest detective has just met his end." Just then the earth seemed to crack open. With a thunderous crash, the quarry erupted in a shower of wind and dust, blinding Daniel and driving him to his knees. When his vision cleared, he saw that he was free of the shroud's tentacle, and that Plunkett had engaged a new enemy. It looked like a scene drawn by the old man himself, an epic battle between the shroud and his arch enemy, Johnny Noble. Only it wasn't Johnny Noble. It was Eric. Daniel had never seen anything like it. Though Eric was obviously still somewhat dazed, seeing his friends in danger had unleashed a new rage in him. Black tendrils lashed at his face and hands, but he shrugged them off, oblivious to the bloody red welts they left on his body. Through an act of sheer will, he fought his way past Plunkett's defenses, and when the two super-powered beings collided, the entire quarry shook with violence. Daniel heard someone call his name, and he turned to see Molly and the rest of the group scrambling over the rocks to reach him. They were all there. Even Rose had appeared in their midst. Clay was conscious, and Daniel found some amusement in the fact that it was Rowan who was helping him limp along. "Daniel, are you all right?" asked Molly. Her voice was barely audible over the sounds of Eric's furious fighting. Daniel nodded, his eyes locked on the struggle raging nearby. "We have to help Eric," she shouted. He won't be able to keep this up for long." Rowan was saying something, but his words were lost in the cacophony around him. "What?" Daniel yelled. "I said," shouted Rowan, moving closer, "that we need to get out of here. This quarry isn't as stable as it looks, and the fighting is going to bring the walls down on top of our heads. I can hear the rumbling already." "We can't leave Eric," said Molly. "We won't," said Daniel. "I promise." The tide was turning. Strong as Eric was, he was clearly no match for the Shroud's powers. and he was weakening fast. "Clay," said Daniel, "can you still fight?" Clay shrugged and spat. "Yeah, I heal pretty fast. I was just a little lightheaded is all. That creep jumped me while my back was turned." But for all of Clay's bluster, he still seemed wobbly on his feet. Daniel hoped that the super